The dense jungles of Southeast Asia were alive with the sounds of nature. Birds chirped from the high canopy, insects hummed in the thick air, and the distant murmur of flowing water was the only other noise that broke the stillness of the forest. The heat was suffocating, and the air was thick with moisture. Sweat dripped down the faces of the soldiers, their khaki uniforms sticking to their skin. Yet, despite the oppressive weather and the swampy landscape, the Japanese convoy marched on through the heart of the jungle. Each soldier focused on the task at hand, advancing toward an unknown destination. The convoy itself was a formidable sight, a well-organized column of trucks, armored vehicles and foot soldiers stretching for miles. Thousands of soldiers, carrying their rifles, satchels, and heavy loads, moved as one in perfect unison. Their discipline and training were evident, their every movement coordinated, and their steps synchronized in such a way that it seemed as if the entire convoy was a living, breathing entity. There was a sense of invincibility among the men. The Japanese forces were confident, almost arrogant. The convoy was not just a force of soldiers, but a symbol of their overwhelming power. With 3,000 men marching through the jungle, they believed they were unstoppable, that no force could break them. This was their moment to prove that the Allied forces, scattered and disorganized, would never dare to challenge such an imposing column deep within enemy territory. As the convoy plodded on, the soldiers could feel the pride in their hearts. They spoke with certainty about the success of their mission. The Allies, they believed, would never risk attacking such a massive force so far from their own base of operations. And even if they did, the Japanese soldiers had the firepower and numbers to crush any resistance. This was not their first march into hostile territory, yet, as always, they would emerge victorious. The convoy itself seemed like a living, breathing beast. A line of trucks stretched far into the distance, each carrying vital supplies, ammunition, food, and medical equipment for the long journey ahead. The armored vehicles, designed to provide protection, rumbled steadily along, their engines humming a low, powerful note. The Japanese soldiers who marched alongside them walked with confidence, each soldier marching in perfect step, their uniforms pristine despite the oppressive heat. At the front of the convoy, a well-groomed officer held a map in his hands, his eyes scanning the terrain ahead. His face was set with determination, his mind calculating every detail of the route. Around him, the soldiers followed with unwavering trust, believing that their leader's judgment was flawless. As the convoy pushed forward, the soldiers exchanged small talk, their voices low and steady. Some discussed the progress of the war, confident that victory was within their grasp. "The Allies are weak," one soldier said, shaking his head. "They won't stand a chance against us." Others spoke of their anticipated arrival at their destination, a fortified position deep within enemy lines. "We'll be there soon," another soldier remarked. "No interruptions. Nothing will stand in our way." Their conversation carried a tone of indifference to the possibility of any attack. They believed their strength was unmatched, and the jungle was their domain. The soldiers of the Allied forces would never be able to breach this powerful, mobile fortress. Despite the arduous conditions of the jungle, the soldiers maintained their composure, and the morale of the convoy was high. They were on a mission, and they knew their superiority. Their commander, Colonel Tanaka, was well respected, his reputation for swift, efficient operations preceding him. As the convoy made its way through the dense trees, Tanaka spoke to his officers, his voice filled with calm assurance. "We've made it this far without interruption," he remarked, looking around at the soldiers. "No enemy has dared to face us, and none will. The Allies are not equipped to fight against such a force." His officers nodded in agreement, each man secretly satisfied with their position of power. Their conversation carried an air of arrogance, completely unaware of the fact that their arrogance would soon become their downfall. A young soldier, sitting with his back against a tree, spoke up. "The war is almost over, isn't it? The Allies are weak. This mission will be the final push. We'll win this war soon." There was laughter in the air, as older soldiers responded, "Yes, we're just cleaning up the remnants now." Victory is inevitable. However, despite the confidence, there was something more. A subtle shift in the air that only a few soldiers seemed to notice. A slight tension in the back of their minds. They were far from their supply lines, deep in enemy territory. And yet, the thought never crossed their minds that anything could happen. While the Japanese forces marched confidently through the jungle, The Americans had been watching from the shadows. Unseen, unheard, and incredibly patient, for days, the American intelligence team had been tracking the movements of the convoy. Their strategy was clear: surprise, precision, and fear. At a forward command post, an American officer, Captain Daniel Holt, paced back and forth. He knew that this was the moment. This convoy, massive and seemingly invulnerable, would be attacked. Not with brute force, but with the full advantage of American intelligence and military tactics. They had a plan that the Japanese would never see coming. "We hit them hard, hit them fast, and leave them scrambling," Holt ordered his men. "This is our chance to turn the tide." As the American team finalized their preparations, they set their sights on the convoy. They knew the path it would take, the exact time it would reach certain points, and the positions the enemy would occupy. The Japanese forces thought they were in control, but the Americans had already calculated every move. The dense jungle path stretched endlessly ahead, the thick foliage on either side providing a false sense of security. The Japanese convoy, still marching confidently through the underbrush, felt as if they were miles away from any real threat. The noise of the jungle had dulled into a background hum, the distant sounds of birds and insects masking the tension that was quietly building in the air. The convoy continued its slow march forward, oblivious to the danger closing in on them. The heat was oppressive, but the soldiers were used to it, pushing forward with practiced discipline, unaware of the storm that was about to engulf them. As the convoy made its way deeper into the jungle, the first sign of trouble arrived. A single American plane, soaring high above the canopy. The roar of its engine was distant, barely noticeable above the sounds of the jungle, but it was enough to catch the attention of a few soldiers. One of the soldiers, wiping sweat from his brow, glanced upward and squinted at the aircraft. "Just a recon plane," he muttered to a fellow soldier. "Nothing to worry about. We've been here before." The others nodded in agreement, dismissing the plane as a mere nuisance, a harmless recon flight that posed no threat to their convoy. It was a common occurrence. Planes occasionally circled overhead to gather intelligence, but they had never been a serious concern. The Japanese forces had grown accustomed to their presence. However, this plane was not just conducting routine reconnaissance. Far below, hidden in the underbrush, American forces were waiting, silently preparing for the strike of a lifetime. While the Japanese soldiers laughed, joked, and made light of the situation, they had no idea that the sound of that single plane was the prelude to something much more devastating. The plane had merely been a signal, the first sign that their overconfidence had set them up for destruction. The American forces were no longer invisible. They had been tracking the convoy for days, learning every detail, every movement, and every route. Their strategy was unlike anything the Japanese had ever faced before. This was not a direct assault. This was the art of ambush, and the Americans were masters at it. The convoy, moving through the jungle, was oblivious to the meticulously set traps. As the Japanese forces pushed forward, they unknowingly entered a trap designed to decimate them. The American forces had positioned themselves in carefully selected ambush points where they would strike with precision and overwhelming force. Every soldier knew their role. The soldiers in the trees, the snipers positioned along key routes, and the artillery teams hidden deep within the jungle. The Japanese forces, with their massive convoy and sense of invulnerability, had no idea they were walking directly into a storm. The Americans had studied their every move, and now they were poised to strike when it was least expected. Without warning, the calm of the jungle was shattered. The sky was suddenly filled with the roar of American bombers, their engines thundering as they dove toward the convoy. Bombs rained down from above, exploding with terrifying force as they struck the convoy. The earth trembled with each explosion, sending soldiers into panic. The shock and confusion were immediate. The Japanese soldiers scrambled for cover, their disciplined ranks disintegrating in the chaos. Trucks were overturned, armored vehicles were blown apart, and the once pristine convoy was reduced to a mass of confusion and destruction. Explosions rang out as artillery shells crashed into the convoy from hidden positions, further complicating the already chaotic situation. From the trees, American infantry emerged, launching surprise attacks on the Japanese positions. The disciplined Japanese forces, trained for combat on their terms, were now facing a new type of warfare: rapid, coordinated, and merciless. The soldiers could hear the shouts and screams of their comrades. The clash of metal, the crackle of gunfire, and the roar of explosions. It was a nightmare unfolding in real time, and they were caught in the heart of it. Amid the chaos, some Japanese soldiers began to grasp the magnitude of what was happening. At first, it had been confusion, an explosion here, an ambush there, but now the scale of the attack was becoming apparent. This was no random skirmish. This was a calculated, methodical assault designed to wipe them out. A young soldier, wide-eyed and trembling, watched as his fellow soldiers were cut down in the initial blast. He had heard of battles, seen the stories, but this was beyond anything he had imagined. "What is this?" he whispered to himself, his breath ragged with fear. Elsewhere, an experienced officer, Colonel Sato, tried desperately to rally his troops. He barked orders, trying to regain control, but the force of the attack was too overwhelming. The sounds of American artillery and the screams of his men filled his ears, drowning out his commands. He turned to see his own soldiers running in all directions, some abandoning their posts, others too stunned to fight back. "This isn't supposed to happen," he shouted, his face flushed with anger and disbelief. But his words fell on deaf ears. His men were too busy trying to survive, too terrified to listen. For some, the realization came too late. The convoy, which had once been a symbol of their strength, was now a sight of devastation. The air was thick with smoke, the ground littered with the wreckage of their once proud force. They were not invincible. They had underestimated their enemies, and now they were paying the price. The air was thick with smoke and the acrid scent of burning rubber and metal. Where once the Japanese convoy had marched confidently through the jungle, now only chaos reigned. The once pristine line of trucks and armored vehicles had been reduced to charred wreckage. A few stubborn fires flickered in the remains of the vehicles, their smoke rising into the sky like a mournful flag of defeat. The jungle, once so serene, now seemed like an unforgiving graveyard for a broken military force. The debris of what had once been a confident, overwhelming army was scattered across the path, some still smoking, others left in eerie silence. The Japanese soldiers, who had once walked with certainty, now stumbled through the wreckage, disoriented and desperate. They had lost more than just supplies and equipment. They had lost their sense of invincibility. The attack had struck with such sudden ferocity that it shattered not only their physical defenses, but their morale. There was no question now of victory. The fight had become one of survival. The commanders, who had stood proud earlier in the day, now found themselves grappling with the reality of their mistake. They had underestimated the resolve and precision of the American forces. Their sense of safety, built upon overconfidence and miscalculation, had led them straight into a trap that had wiped out their convoy with deadly efficiency. "We never saw it coming," one officer muttered under his breath as he surveyed the destruction. His once imposing figure now slumped, the weight of defeat heavy on his shoulders. The American forces, relentless and efficient, continued to push forward. Their ambush tactics had been executed flawlessly, and now they were moving to finish what they had started. There was no pause for celebration, no time for pride. Just the cold, calculated precision that had made this attack so devastating. As the dust settled, the once strong Japanese convoy lay in ruins. Where the convoy had once moved as a unified force, now it was a scattered collection of isolated units, most of which were either destroyed or incapacitated. The survivors, too few in number, were no longer a threat. They were simply fighting for survival. American soldiers, with their disciplined movements and unwavering determination, swept through the wreckage, taking control of the area. The sheer effectiveness of the American strategy was undeniable. With their superior intelligence, they had not only predicted the movements of the convoy, but had anticipated its every vulnerability. Each attack, each strike had been calibrated to maximize damage, to disrupt the Japanese forces in ways they could never have prepared for. Where the Japanese forces had once believed themselves unbeatable, the Americans had shown them the true meaning of tactical warfare. The remaining Japanese soldiers, once so full of confidence, now found themselves in full retreat. With their morale shattered, they had been blindsided, outsmarted, and outgunned. The tactical brilliance of the American forces had crushed their spirits as effectively as it had destroyed their convoy. This attack was more than just a tactical victory. It was a game changer. The Japanese forces had suffered a humiliating defeat, one that would reverberate throughout the entire region. The convoy, which had been seen as a symbol of their dominance, had been utterly destroyed, its remnants scattered across the jungle. For the Japanese, this loss would not just be felt in the immediate aftermath, but would leave an indelible mark on their future operations. From a strategic standpoint, the attack demonstrated the brilliance of American military intelligence and the effectiveness of their ambush tactics. The Japanese forces had been lulled into a false sense of security, but the Americans had been quietly observing, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. This operation would serve as a reminder to the Japanese of the dangers of overconfidence, and how a lack of strategic awareness could lead to catastrophic consequences. The defeat of the convoy also had a psychological impact on the remaining Japanese forces. Word of the attack spread quickly, instilling fear and uncertainty among their ranks. If the Americans could destroy a convoy of 3,000 soldiers so easily, what would stop them from striking again? For the Americans, the attack had shown that intelligence and surprise could make all the difference on the battlefield. It wasn't just about strength, it was about knowing when and how to strike. This battle would become a textbook example of how the unexpected could reshape the course of a war. The battle that had just unfolded was not just a confrontation between two military forces. It was a turning point in the war. The Japanese, who had once felt invincible, had been shown the fragility of their confidence. The Americans, though outnumbered, had proven that the strength of their strategy could outweigh the strength of their enemies' numbers. As the dust settled and the sounds of battle faded into the distance, the question remained, what if the Japanese had known? What if they had not underestimated their enemy? Could they have prepared for the devastating blow that had shattered their convoy? In that moment, the balance of power had shifted. The Japanese forces, once seemingly unstoppable, now faced an uncertain future. The Americans, having struck a decisive blow, knew that they had turned the tide in their favor.